The town of Red Rock lay still under the glare of a merciless sun. Dust hung in the air, drifting across the wide main street where wagon wheels had carved deep ruts. A few merchants leaned in their doorways, watching life crawl by, while women in long dresses hurried to finish errands before the day's heat grew unbearable. Children darted between barrels, their laughter carrying faintly, but none of it reached the small figure standing near the trough at the center of town. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her hair, dark and tangled, clung to her thin face, and her blue dress, once meant for Sunday best, was faded and torn. Bare feet pressed into the dirt as she clutched a small bundle of cloth against her chest, the only possession she had left. Her eyes were hollow, hungry, but more than hunger lived there. Loneliness wrapped her like a second skin. The townsfolk saw her but looked away. Some shook their heads as though she were a nuisance. Others whispered, too cowardly to speak openly. A few laughed as if her ragged state were a jest. To them she was not a child, only a reminder of misfortune, something to be avoided. Then the sheriff came. Sheriff Tate was a broad-shouldered man with thinning blonde hair and a belly that strained against his vest. The silver badge pinned to his chest caught the sun with each step he took. His eyes, small and sharp, narrowed at the sight of the girl. Where others turned away, he saw an opportunity to assert his authority. "Well, well," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "What's this stray doing cluttering up my street?" The girl shrank back, clutching her bundle tighter. The sheriff stepped closer, boots thudding against the boards of the walkway. "No folks to claim you? No bed to sleep in? You'll not last long here, girl." His voice was dripping with mockery. "Best you be moved along before you start begging under every porch." A chuckle rose from some of the men nearby. The sound cut into the girl deeper than any lash. She stared at the ground, her body trembling. Sheriff Tate tilted his hat back and smirked. "Red Rock's no place for strays. You hear me? You'd best be gone or I'll see to it myself." The girl said nothing. But in that silence, the cruelty of the town settled heavy, like thunderclouds gathering before a storm. The sheriff's voice boomed across the dusty street, his words carrying like the crack of a whip. He wasn't merely warning the girl, he was performing. Every smirk, every drawled insult was meant for the crowd that had started to gather. And the townsfolk were all too eager to watch. "She don't belong here," he barked, turning his head so everyone could hear. "A child like this, with no people, no name worth knowing, she'll only bring trouble." "Strays always do." The little girl's hands clutched her bundle tighter, as though the faded cloth in her arms could shield her from his scorn. Her lips trembled, but no words came. She had learned long ago that speaking only gave cruel men more to mock. The sheriff circled her slowly, boots grinding against the dirt. His shadow loomed over her small frame, long and heavy in the afternoon sun. "What's in the bundle, huh? Scraps you stole. Or maybe just a rag you call treasure." His words dripped disdain. "You're filth, girl. Filth has no place in Red Rock." A boy in the crowd, no older than 12, mimicked the sheriff, tossing a pebble at her feet. The girl flinched but did not look up. Laughter rippled through the onlookers, fueled by the authority of the badge that mocked her. One of the women standing nearby tugged her child closer, whispering, "Don't look. She's nothing but bad luck." Another man spat in the dirt, muttering, "Sheriff's right. Town doesn't need mouths it can't feed." The sheriff grinned wider at their approval. He bent closer, his face inches from hers. His breath smelled of tobacco and whiskey. "Best not to test me, little one," he hissed, his tone turning sharper, colder. "I've dragged grown men by the scruff for less than loitering. Don't think I won't drag you." Her knees shook beneath her thin frame. She wanted to run, but fear pinned her in place as if invisible chains held her fast. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked hard, refusing to let them fall. The sheriff straightened, pulling back his coat just far enough to show the revolver gleaming at his hip. He didn't draw it, he didn't have to. The threat was in the gesture, in the cruel confidence with which he let the crowd see his power over even a child. The crowd laughed again, louder this time, their cruelty echoing in her ears. And the sheriff, reveling in their approval, prepared to make good on his threat. The sheriff reached for the girl's arm, his thick fingers stretching toward her fragile wrist. The crowd leaned forward, eager for the spectacle, their laughter rising like the hum of angry hornets. But before his hand could close around her, Another sound cut through the noise, measured, deliberate, steady, the sound of boots striking hard-packed dirt. Every head turned toward the far end of the street. A tall figure emerged from the glare of the sun, walking with the calm, unhurried gait of a man who feared nothing. Dust clung to his long coat, frayed at the edges from countless miles. His broad shoulders moved with quiet strength, and beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, his eyes were hidden. But his presence spoke louder than words. The sheriff froze, his hand hovering in midair. The laughter faltered. Even the restless horses tied to the rail seemed to sense the shift in the air. The cowboy kept walking, each step carrying weight, until he stopped just a few paces from the girl. His shadow stretched over her trembling frame, and for the first time since the crowd had turned cruel, she felt something more powerful than fear. She felt shielded. The sheriff forced a laugh, puffing out his chest as if to reclaim the ground he felt slipping from beneath him. "Well, look here," he drawled. "Some drifter wandered into Red Rock. Keep walking, stranger." "This is town business." The cowboy didn't move. His hands rested easily at his sides, nowhere near the holster at his hip. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, low, but carried clearly across the hushed street. "Is this what passes for justice here? A lawman dragging a hungry child?" The words landed heavy, like stones cast into still water. A ripple passed through the crowd. Murmurs, shuffling feet, averted eyes. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "She's a stray," he snapped, his bravado returning. "Nothing but trouble. Town don't need her." The cowboy's gaze sharpened, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. His voice did not rise, but its quiet certainty carried more power than the sheriff's shouting. "No child is trouble," he said firmly. "The trouble lies with those who stand by and do nothing." The girl's wide eyes lifted to him, searching his face. For the first time all day, she felt the faint stirrings of hope, because here, at last, was someone who had not turned away. And the sheriff knew in that moment that this drifter was not about to step aside. The street had gone silent. Dust hung in the air, suspended between the heat and the weight of what was unfolding. The sheriff squared his shoulders, tugging at his vest as if to remind everyone of the badge pinned to it. Pride burned in his eyes, but beneath it flickered something else. Unease. "You think you can walk into my town," he barked, his voice pitched higher than before, "and tell me how to do my job? You don't know who you're standing against." The cowboy's expression didn't change. His stillness carried more force than a dozen shouted words. He didn't even glance at the sheriff's hand, which twitched dangerously near the revolver at his side. Instead, his voice came steady, like a slow river cutting through stone. "I know enough. A man who calls himself sheriff and uses fear against a child isn't worth the badge he wears." The crowd shifted uneasily, their loyalty torn between habit and the truth they had just heard. Some lowered their eyes to the dirt. Others cast wary glances at the lawman, wondering if his authority was as unshakable as they had believed. The sheriff's face reddened. "Careful, stranger. Words like that can get a man shot." He took a half-step closer, his boots grinding in the dust. The cowboy didn't flinch. His voice stayed low, but it carried like a bell ringing across the silence. "A real man draws his gun to defend the innocent, not to bully them. You raise your hand against her, and you'll answer to me." A hush swept through the street, sharp and complete. Even the laughter that had filled the air minutes before had dried up, replaced by the crackling tension of an unseen storm. The little girl, clutching her bundle with white knuckles, pressed closer to the cowboy's side. For the first time, she felt her trembling ease. The sheriff's hand hovered an inch above the grip of his revolver. His pride screamed at him to prove himself, to put this drifter in the dirt and reclaim his authority. But the cowboy's calm, unblinking stare froze him in place. It wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was something heavier, something unshakable. A bead of sweat slid down the sheriff's temple. He spat into the dirt, his voice breaking slightly as he muttered, "This ain't over." But in the eyes of the townsfolk, something already had ended. The sheriff's power had cracked, and a new strength stood in its place, the quiet, immovable presence of a cowboy who chose to protect instead of shame. The air still hummed with tension as the sheriff stepped back, his pride bruised before the eyes of the people he once ruled through fear. He tried to hold their gaze, but the weight of silence pressed harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, the crowd was no longer laughing with him. They were simply watching, waiting, uncertain. The cowboy bent his head toward the girl, speaking softly enough that only she could hear. "You're safe now. No one's going to harm you." His words, simple as they were, broke through the last of her terror. She blinked, and tears slid down her dust-streaked cheeks, not from shame this time, but from the unfamiliar relief of being defended. The cowboy straightened and swept his gaze across the gathering. His voice, calm yet commanding, rolled over them like distant thunder. "Show's over. Go back to your business." Some townsfolk shuffled away quickly, ashamed of their part in the cruelty. Others lingered at the edges, their faces clouded with something they hadn't felt in years, doubt in the man who wore the badge. A few even looked at the cowboy with something close to respect, though none dared to say it aloud. The sheriff stood rigid, jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. He muttered something bitter under his breath, but he didn't stop the cowboy when he reached down and offered the girl his hand. She hesitated. Hands had only ever brought her pain before, rough striking or prying. But this hand was different. It waited, it didn't grab. With trembling fingers she reached out, and when he closed his calloused palm around hers, she felt steadiness instead of fear. The cowboy led her through the parting crowd. No one stepped forward to block their path. Boots scuffed nervously in the dirt, hats tilted low and eyes darted away, unwilling to meet the stare of the man who had faced their sheriff without flinching. At the edge of town, his horse waited, a tall bay with intelligent eyes and a calm patience. The cowboy secured the girl's bundle into the saddlebag, then lifted her gently onto the saddle. She gasped at the unfamiliar height but clung tightly, her heart pounding with something new, safety. Mounting behind her, the cowboy gave the reins a light touch. The horse stepped forward, hooves drumming a steady beat against the earth. The townsfolk watched as the pair rode away, the fading light casting them as dark silhouettes against the open prairie. The sheriff's glare burned into their backs, but his silence spoke louder than words. Something had shifted, something had broken, and Red Rock would not forget it. The prairie stretched wide and endless, painted gold by the dying light of the sun. Each hoofbeat carried them farther from the town's cruelty, farther from the jeers and the sheriff's shadow. The girl held tightly to the saddle horn, her bundle secure in the cowboy's saddlebag, while behind her his steady presence kept her anchored. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She was being carried to something better. As night fell, the cowboy drew rein in a quiet hollow by a creek. He dismounted first, then helped the girl down gently. She stumbled on her bare feet, but his hand steadied her before she could fall. Nearby, the horse lowered its head to drink, the soft sound of water blending with the crackle of a small fire the cowboy soon built. The girl sat close to the flames, hugging her knees to her chest. The warmth soothed her chilled skin, though her heart still trembled from the day's cruelty. The cowboy handed her a piece of bread and a strip of dried meat. She accepted them cautiously, nibbling as though afraid they might be snatched away. For a long while, neither spoke. The fire popped, the night air hummed with the sound of crickets, and the stars opened wide above them like lanterns strung across the heavens. Finally, in a voice soft and unsure, the girl whispered, "Why did you help me?" The cowboy lifted his gaze from the fire. His face, lined by years of hard living, softened in the glow of the flames. "Because no child should have to stand alone," he said simply. The words hung between them, steady and certain, like the earth beneath their feet. Her throat tightened. Tears slid down her cheeks, but these were not the tears of shame she had shed in town. They were something different. Tears of release, of being seen after so long in the shadows. She swiped at them quickly, embarrassed, but a small, shaky smile tugged at her lips. The cowboy shifted his coat, draping it around her thin shoulders. "Rest," he murmured. "Tomorrow'll be brighter." The girl leaned against him, her small frame finally surrendering its tension. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she allowed herself to feel safe. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, she stood beside him, clutching her bundle. The sheriff's cruelty was behind her now. Ahead lay open prairie, endless roads, and one truth she carried like a treasure. She was not forgotten. She was not alone, She had been saved and given a chance to begin again.